Well, today has broken all the rules. It's virtually broken Parliament as it functions. Jill Rutter joins us, Stephen Bush joins us, and Fraser Nelson too, to try and make some sense of this. I guess the first question, Jill, do you think that all protocol is now out the window, or are we still able to follow a sort of a pathway through this?
We have a rough timetable sketched out for the next 3 or 4 days. That's probably about the sort of longest period we can look forward to in politics at the moment. We have the confidence vote tomorrow. That'll follow sort of, standard process on that. We assume the Prime Minister will probably win it. Obviously, things have changed enormously if she doesn't. And then the next big deadline is this motion she's got to table by Monday. The bit of timetable she lost control of last week in the Dominic Grieve amendment, when she's got to bring forward her plan. And we hear she's going to have all these emergency talks with opposition parties. But it's basically very difficult to tell what goes ahead. Normal rules don't seem to apply. And the government, of course, now knows it can't really rely on the Speaker in the way it's thought it could do in the past to
Does that
deliver
change
the government's business.
Everything now?
I think what it's done, and it's quite interesting, what it's done is sort of shift the balance a bit towards the backbenchers. And what we're really seeing is a tussle between the government and the backbenchers for who's going to control the process, who can dictate what options are there. The government now seems to be finally making some overtures and recognising its position of weakness, to sort of say, well, we need to invite you in rather than try and get everything through you by stealth. So it'd be interesting to see whether this enables the government to actually get back a bit of the grip that it appeared to lose in the last few days.
I don't know whether you've felt it just walking around here, but there's been, whatever side, this palpable air of relief. Everyone is smiling. I think Caroline Flint called it the lancing of the boil. Do you think this is, what I would call everyone's pet unicorn, that the Brexiteers think that it's going their way now, the Remainers think that they've kind of worked back their power now? What do you sense?
I do think a lot of people have voted against this deal because they think it makes their option more likely. Whether their option is a new general election, a second referendum or no deal, they all see it coming their way somehow. And right now we're in this sort of in denial where everybody thinks that something will magically appear. Theresa May, why didn't she have this vote last month? Because she knew she'd be defeated. She's had it now. She thought something would magically appear. It didn't. So now she says she's off to Brussels to think that something's going to magically appear over there. It probably won't. And the bottom line is there's only one thing that Parliament has approved, and that's a no-deal Brexit. If they don't agree on something else, then that's what's going to happen. A lot of people are in denial about this and say, oh, well, there's no majority for it. It doesn't matter. All that matters is there going to be a majority for something else? And if there's not, that's what we're going to get.
And do you think that no deal is actually the Theresa May now preferred option if her deal doesn't get through? Do you think that's the one that's least awkward for her?
I think she'd prefer to survive. That's her objective. And I think to do that, she has to make out like she doesn't want no deal. Otherwise, some of her rebels might be tempted to vote with Jeremy Corbyn tomorrow in the confidence motion. To stay number 10, she needs to assure them that she's going to try something else, however unlikely that would be. But I think the truth is actually worse. I don't think she does have a plan B at all. I don't think there's anything there at all, just blind hope.
Stephen, do you think that Labour is in just as much denial about what they can achieve from this? I mean, Barry Gardiner was still talking about a general election, even though I think most people in Labour concede they're probably going to lose the vote of no confidence tomorrow. Where do they come in then?
Well, I think where they come in is they are, as you say, I think, in willful denial about their ability to get another election. But their hope is that they can keep saying, well, if we don't get them tomorrow, we can get them next week. And that avoids the point of maximum pain for them, which is having to decide whether they're going to disappoint Remainers or Leavers or both.
So there are reports tonight that some 100 Labour MPs are going to pivot to a second referendum tomorrow. I haven't had that substantiated by more than one source, but would you say that they can take their leadership with them if there are 100, 150 that do that, or do they just get left out there alone?
I think the crucial thing is that it's not whether or not they can take the leadership with them. 115, I think, would be the maximum amount of Labour MPs who probably would be willing to say that now. But the difficulty is 150, 115 is not enough to pass anything in the Commons. And that matters a lot more than where Corbyn ends up. The thing is, Labour MPs will now feel freed to vote how they want on Brexit. They'll feel that we've proven we can't get an election. That means if I'm worried about no deal and I don't want to block Brexit, like Caroline Flint, she can vote for the Conservative deal. If I want to stop Brexit, I can vote to stop the deal. So the big difference is Labour MPs will feel more freed up now, I think.
And Jill, do you agree with Fraser that as things stand, the only thing that's become more likely is no deal? I'm not asking you to put money on it, but where is your gut sense
Where Fraser
now?
is absolutely right is that that's what's in law. That was what went into law when we passed the EU Withdrawal Act. Is what happened. We told the EU that we would be leaving on the 29th of March 2019. So unless there's a majority for something else, and that can be passed into law. So it's not good enough just to pass a bunch of motions saying this or that. You've actually got to change UK law and potentially, for most of the options, get some sort of different agreement from the EU. Unless you can do that, that's where we're heading. But I think one of the things that's really interesting is if you look at some of the ministers who are most worried about no deal, it's not necessarily a sort of Brexiteer, non-Brexiteer split. One of the splits is ministers who actually are in departments which are involved in the preparations for no deal, like Michael Gove, and ministers who aren't, like foreign secretaries or people. So the people who are further away from actually seeing how gruesome it might get are, you know, a bit more cavalier about the prospects of no deal. So I think.
But when people say, you know, one chap said to me today, look, you know, as a Brexit voter, everyone who is against any other form of Brexit than no deal knows that they are actually trying to seek a compromise that was not voted for. Do any of you believe that? I mean, do you think, you know, we're missing that actually the 17.4 was essentially about a no-deal Brexit?
I don't think it was about any specific sort. They just wanted out of the EU. And for example, if the EU would say, OK, we're going to get you out of the backstop, we'll allow you to eject in the same way that any NATO member, any EU member can eject from that, her deal would pass, people would be relatively happy. But right now, there's a sense that there's a kind of conspiracy going on to keep Britain in the EU against its will, or an all but name. And people get the sense that they're being shortchanged in general. But it's funny, because nobody is really coming out with anything that's going to address the fundamental problem. People don't think Brexit is happening. A lot of people are not. I think the public is far less wary of no deal than the politicians. And even the ministers I speak to actually are less wary of it than they were a month ago. I think the last few weeks has changed. Planning in the Parliament has come along. They think, yes, it's going to be very disruptive.
Could we just talk ourselves into it then?
I think it's very possible. I mean, we are a day closer now, and every day that someone doesn't do something to prevent it, we get closer. And everyone who doesn't want no deal over there basically thinks, and because it's so bad, someone who's not them will have to take political damage to avert it.
I began the evening talking about legacy, whether Theresa May sought it or not. She has now become the Prime Minister that has overseen the biggest parliamentary defeat, we think, ever. Do you recover from that? Can she rewrite how history will see her?
She blew her majority at a general election. You don't recover from that. Ever since that moment, she has basically been a woman who is waiting to get ejected by her party when they can agree who to replace her. So yes, this is dreadful. Yes, today's the worst ever day, but there will be worse days to come. That's the tragedy of Theresa May's premiership. I mean, after the election, things were awful for her and have just got worse.
But you would assume she will survive tomorrow. I mean, the vote of no confidence is name only, is it, Jill?
I think the government will survive. I think the really interesting thing is what happens in the cabinet. We keep on saying about whether the Prime Minister has a plan B. Can the cabinet agree on where you go next? I mean, she's just about managed to hold the cabinet together with a few people deciding to leave on the basis of this sort of very carefully constructed, very fragile compromise. If she has to move, she's got to move one way or the other towards no deal. We're told various members of the cabinet have said they won't serve in a cabinet that's heading for no deal. Or she moves towards a much softer Brexit. There are other people who will be, you know, saying, maybe for good reasons, maybe for less honourable reasons, that they don't want to be associated with something that looks like it's reaching out to the Labour Party, heading towards...
Now, maybe, Stephen, do you think becomes the dominant voice in Cabinet? Who do you think leads this now? Is it still Theresa May, or is there...
Well, she now can't be got rid of this side of an election, so that makes her very powerful. But the minister they still believe they cannot lose is Michael Gove, the one who kind of credentials whatever version of Brexit she ends up with. So if he goes, then things change. So it's her and him, I think.
Thank you all very much indeed.